Hello my friends on the internet, and welcome back to the complete story and lore explanation of every boss in Black Myth Wukong. Or if this is your first time, welcome. We'll be focusing in this video on the backstories as well as in-game events of every boss in Chapter 2, called Yellow Sand Desolate Dusk, which takes place in the desert region known as the Yellow Wind Ridge, and let me tell you, if you liked the stories of the bosses of Chapter 1, oh boy are you going to like Chapter 2. There's heartbreak, nuanced morality, heroic ambitions, dog murder, you name it. And yes, that last one is every bit as sad as it sounds. If you missed my video covering Chapter 1's bosses though, please feel free to check that one out after you're done here. I'll have it linked in the description below. By the way, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you for the amazing turnout on Chapter 1's video. All of your likes and positive comments and new subscribers made this bandit's heart very full. And on that note, if you want to see the other chapters explained as well, make sure you're subscribed to stick around for when they drop. Before we get into the bosses of Chapter 2 though, I do have one correction to make regarding my previous Black Myth video. If you've seen it, then you know that I made the claim towards the end of the video that the white-clad noble was the Beargwai's resurrected white serpent scholar friend who soon Wukong had killed in the novel. This is incorrect, as several commenters very politely pointed out to me. He's actually another character entirely, and his similarities to the Beargwai's old serpent friend are simply coincidental. We actually do know who he is, as well as who his brother is that he referred to several times. However, the answer to his identity actually lies in a much later boss's explanation. One Erlang Shen, who's going to be the star of the Chapter 6 video, so for the time being, I won't be covering that just yet. For now, I just wanted you to know that the previous explanation of the white-clad noble is not actually accurate. Anyway, with my mistakes out of the way, let's turn our focus to the Yaoguais of Yellow Wind Ridge. Just like last time, there are the main bosses that tend to be very interconnected with one another, and there are the minor bosses who sometimes are just as connected but sometimes are a bit less so, and therefore much more easily understood on their own. So let's start off with the most independently understood minor bosses and work our way up. First up is the Earth Wolf, which may appear at first glance to be some weird looking, only slightly dog-like rock monster, but I will assure you, truly is the goodest boy of all the good boys. Or at least it used to be before it got resurrected from death and took on this appearance. According to the in-game lore, once upon a time there was a general's son who served as a cruel and ruthless drill master over the soldiers in a barracks, the specific location of which is unknown, but due to the fact that there are no soldier stations in the Yellow Wind Ridge or remnants of army forces that I can tell from the environment, I'm going to assume that this story takes place elsewhere. Anyway, this drill sergeant was a hunter, and he had a dog that he would hunt with, an ancient Chinese breed known as the Shigo, which literally means slender or thin dog. These dogs are sighthounds, which tend to excel at hunting and have been around in real life for at least 2,500 years, and have always been very popular with Chinese nobles and denizens of dynasties. In fact, some scholars believe that Erlang Shen's mythological dog that we see at the start of the game, known as the Zhaoshan Chon, or the Sky Barking Hound, is also a Chinese Shigo, but that's neither here nor there. Back to the drill master though. After one hunting session that ended up being completely unsuccessful, he ended up blaming his dog and ordered his other soldiers to beat his dog to death. This made the soldiers very uneasy, and none of them wanted to do it, but as they had their orders, they did exactly what they were ordered to do and beat the dog to death, burying it in a field behind their barracks that just so happened to be covered in lungshi mushrooms. The soldiers would even go out to the grave at night and chant sutras for the poor dog so that its soul could rest in peace, which would end up having other consequences. As time went on, the drill master would begin to hear barking outside at night. Obviously this was a problem, as he had ordered his dog to be killed, so he would continually send men out to investigate, who each would return with nothing. It kept happening night after night though, so eventually he went out himself to investigate the barking. Eventually he finally heard and recognized it as coming from underneath the ground, from the grave of his dead dog. He then ordered his men to dig up the Shigo's corpse, and much to everyone's surprise, the hound was alive again and jumped out of the grave. But now it was different. Its skeleton was exposed in some areas, like its feet and tail, and it had fused with the longshi mushrooms, which made it grow root-like tentacles over its arms and neck. It also had two very hard mushrooms growing on its head that acted like antlers. When the drill master saw this undead monster, he was thrilled and called out to his dog, who recognized his master's voice and, still being the good boy that it always was, came joyfully bounding towards him. However, as he leapt into his master's arms, those antler-like hardened mushrooms on his head head gored through the chest of the cruel drill sergeant, who bled out and died on the spot right then and there. The soldiers were so flustered in trying to save the life of the drill master that nobody even noticed that the Earth Wolf had run off, vanishing without a trace, eventually ending up right here in the Sandgate village of Yellowwind Ridge, where it was finally put to rest by the Destined One. Next up, we have a peculiar, kind of disgusting boss known as the Gore-Eyed Taoist. And in case you were wondering, the word Taoist is used many times in Chinese culture and refers to an individual, normally a monk, who is interested in or otherwise follows the understandings and worldview of the Tao, also known as the Tao, roughly translated in English as the way or the path. Taoism is an ancient Chinese philosophy and religion, first introduced to the world by Lao Tzu around 500 BC, that in a very brief nutshell entails the belief that all nature must be balanced and humans as well as animals should strive to live in said balance. Like I said, that's an extremely brief nutshell explanation, and the fact that the Gore-Eyed Taoist is called a Taoist doesn't really matter for his story in the game all that much, but hey, now you know. Anyway, once upon a time, this Taoist, who trained in the mystic arts upon Mount Lingtai, arrived at a temple known as the Temple of Yellow Flowers, which is actually a location with a bunch of other lore associated with it that we'll be getting to in Chapter 4. He waltzed up to the place and literally demanded that the master of the temple submit and yield to him the secret of the temple, which again we'll be getting to in Chapter 4. That's 2 videos from now. Did I mention you should be subscribed? Long story short, he was every bit as helpless as he sounds and was captured immediately by a very powerful Yaoguai chief known as the Commander Beetle, after which he was subdued within a cocoon sack. A few days later he was able to break out of his sticky situation though, but oddly enough, when the master of the temple was told about this, the master just responded with a smile, knowing that the Taoist's fate was already sealed. The Taoist noticed that ever since he was placed within the cocoon, there just so happened to be a weird fleshy growth on his back that, get this, had a bunch of eyes sprouting out of it. Now, most of us would find that at least mildly alarming, but Mr. Taoist didn't think too much of it and continued onward with his wandering to and fro. He probably thought it was a bunch of zits or something. Anyway, one day he arrived at a desolate mountain and upon seeing villagers struggling and bandits running wild, decided to settle down and begin using his mystic arts to perform several miracles over the next several years, such as summoning rain and lots of lush greenery, and he was even able to enter the bandits' hideout and preach the wisdom of Taoism to them, which resulted in them forsaking their evil bandit ways and coming down from their hideout to live among the villagers in peace. This continued on for years until one day when the Taoist, under a strange kind of trance, walked into the village again and raised a ritual staff at its entrance, which began to emit a blood-red light. Everyone who this light touched went completely blood-crazed, violently tearing into one another until every single one of the villagers was slaughtered and the ground was filled with blood. Once this happened, the aforementioned fleshy eye hump on the Taoist's back opened up with its eyes all wide open and slurped up as much blood as it possibly could from the village slaughter. And when it couldn't slurp up anymore, it closed all of its eyes and closed back up, having grown significantly in size. The Taoist then regained his consciousness, which apparently he didn't have previously, after which he set off once again to find another place to settle, assumedly to, feed the Gore-Eye hump on his back. Eventually, he ended up here in the Yellowwind Ridge, and for some reason, I don't feel too bad about ending this particular Taoist's life. The next minor boss we'll cover is the Yellow-Robed Squire, who actually has essentially the same backstory as the White-Clad Noble, in that, as I mentioned previously, he was also sent here by his brother, and his story is also closely related to that of Erlang Shen's in the game. He is a completely different character though. In stark contrast to the tea and poems of the White-Clad Noble, the Yellow-Robed Squire is more focused on beer and food, which, makes sense since he's a pig. As far as his purpose in Chapter 2 is concerned, he arrived here in the Yellowwind Ridge specifically to meet the Destined One and lead him to the kingdom of Sahali in the distant past, where the Destined One encounters the old Tiger Vanguard, the Yellow Wind Sage, and a giant beetle Yaoguai known as Fubon, all of which have a ton to do with the lore of these bosses and will be explained a bit later on in the video. There are only 2 remaining minor bosses to cover, but they just so happen to be the second members of the Frog and Dragon Yaoguai bosses. The frog being Lang Li Goba and the dragon being Black Long, which both continue the overarching stories of the frog and dragon Yaoguais from the first chapter of the game, which are also present in every chapter. But again, I'll be covering those storylines in their entirety in another video, so for now, I digress. With the minor bosses out of the way though, it's finally time to talk about the real reason you're here, the Yellow Wind Sage and his lackeys. Just like last time, since all the bosses are pretty interconnected with one another, we're just going to start off with the Wind Sage himself and weave his story into everyone else's along the way. The first thing we see in chapter 2 is the Destined One all shot up with arrows, literally just waiting to die. However, before this happens, a wild headless singing monk appears, who in the English version randomly has a Scottish accent. Anyway, the lyrics of the headless musician's song already begin to tell the tale of the Yellow Wind Sage. And right off the bat, you can tell that the Wind Sage has a backstory that extends to, you guessed it, the novel Journey to the West, which I will be heavily drawing from for these stories. Once upon a time, long ago, there was a little yellow-furred mink, or marten depending on who you ask, that lived at the base of Vulture Peak, which is the same destination that Wukong's group led by the monk Tung Tsangzang was journeying to, as well as one of the favorite meditation retreats of the Buddha. The little mink meditated on the teachings of Taoism and the way at the foot of the mount until it achieved a humanoid form, becoming a rat-like Yao Guai. The Yellow Guai ended up stealing some of the precious oil from one of the fragrant Blossom Precious candles on said Vulture Peak, then tried to run away out of fear that some of the attendants there would capture him. He was unsuccessful in his escape though, since the Buddha already knew of the thievery. However, the Buddha was not convinced that the rat Guai was worthy of death, so he instead asked the Bodhisattva Lingji to instead capture the thief and simply banish him to the region that would eventually be known as the Yellow Wind Ridge, sparing the Guai's life on the condition that he would cease his thieving ways, and of course not use the teachings that he learned from his time studying Taoism for evil. After this, the Bodhisattva and Rat Guai became as master and disciple to one another, and the rat headed off towards the Yellow Wind Ridge for his banishment. But at some point, either before this or literally on the way to the ridge, he discovered and cultivated a new, unique power using the mystic arts, the ability to create and weaponize wind. But not just any wind. We're not just talking about your regular little dust devil out in the desert. The Rat Guai's wind was so powerful that in the novel, it is said that when he used it, it could darken the earth and heavens above, and even disturbed other characters in other parts of the world, such as Erlang Shen, who lost his way to Guangzhou town, or Li Jing, whose pagoda was blown right out of his hand. It's said to be so strong that it can split rocks and human beings alike, and the only way to survive its blast would be to be a celestial immortal yourself. Or, you know, soon Wukong. But we'll get to that later. The name of this magical, all-powerful wind was the Samadhi wind, with the word Samadhi being an ultimate concept appearing in Buddhism as well as other religions such as Hinduism or Sikhism. After the Rat Guai developed this divine skill, he also met a nameless tiger Yao Guai, known only to us as the Tiger Vanguard. No, not that Tiger Vanguard, this Tiger Vanguard. That Tiger Vanguard is this Tiger Vanguard's son. And this is his brother. And this is their follower. They're all bosses and will all be explained later in the video. Anyway, Daddy Vanguard swore loyalty to the rat and became his trusty servant slash henchman slash vanguard. After this, the rat sensed a great power slumbering within the kingdom of Sahali, and the two of them set off to find out more about this power. Sahali was ruled by the King of the Flowing Sands, another boss in the game, and is the kingdom in which the sun is said to set in the evening. Apparently every day when the sun would set and dip beneath the western seas, the hissing sound of the great ball of fire hitting the water would grow to be so loud that it was powerful enough to actually kill the children of Sahali. So the Buddha, out of benevolence, gifted them with a large drum so that they could beat it every evening and neutralize the sound of the hissing setting sun. The people of Sahali in turn began to praise and worship the Buddha, who essentially had saved the lives of their children. But eventually this praise towards Buddhism began to overshadow the people's reverence for their own king. In retaliation, the King of Flowing Sands then outright banished Buddhism in Sahali, even going so far as to take down the temples that the people had begun putting up, and banish monks who had settled there, and even change the kingdom's name, although I'm not sure if this was from or to the name Sahali. Another name for the kingdom is the Kingdom of Flowing Sands, but I digress. Not long after Buddhism was banished, the drum was beat at night just like it was all the other nights, but this time it summoned a giant beetle Yao Guai king known as Fuban, which we can fight in the game by traveling to the past. Fuban the angry beetle would rain terror over the kingdom of Sahali Guai every evening, since they would have to summon it every time the drum was beat. And as the giant monster destroyed their buildings and devoured any poor souls unfortunate enough to be caught in its path, the people began to believe it was their karmic retribution for their king outlawing Buddhism. I also believe that this beetle monster was sent as retribution for a reason that I'll get to in just a sec. This made the fearful king reverse his banishment of Buddhism in hopes of undoing this beetle curse, but to no avail. The beetle kept coming and was essentially indestructible. None of Sahali's forces could even lay a scratch on its impenetrable armor with swords or arrows as it laid siege to the kingdom night after night, and according to the yellow-robed squire, spread fear of the kingdom to merchants and even neighboring kingdoms. It's at this point that the yellow rat Guai sensed the great power of Fuban and approached the kingdom of Sahali, deciding to defeat this beetle and harness its great power for himself. Although to the people of Sahali, it seemed like he simply saw their struggle at the hands of the beetle monster and decided to help them out by defeating the beast himself because he's just a good Samaritan like that. However, strangely enough, when the rat tried to fight the monster, he noticed that the beetle was somehow completely immune to his Samadhi wind. And since his Samadhi wind is magical, he realized that it must mean the beetle was in possession of some kind of anti-magic charm that countered the power of his wind. This is when the rat meets the Destined One, who bested but did not kill his servant, the Tiger Vanguard, in order to approach him. And fun fact, if I understand this correctly, this event is actually before the rat and Tiger Vanguard meet Sun Wukong in the novel, meaning the rat actually met the Destined One prior to meeting Sun Wukong, but we'll get to that in just a bit. The Destined One then aids the rat in defeating Fuban by siphoning the charm out of the Buddha head on Fuban's back, which, as I mentioned earlier, to me implies very strongly that this beetle was sent to the kingdom of Sahali as retribution for forsaking the Buddha, who saved them. After all, why else would a giant Buddha statue head that looks exactly like the head of Bodhisattva Lingji, that contains what is likely the very same wind tamer pearl that the Buddha gave to Bodhisattva Lingji in the novel, be attached to the back of a giant beetle Yao Guai, hellbent on destroying this particular kingdom, which just so happened to turn its back on the Buddha after being saved by him? Anyway, after the wind tamer is removed from the beetle, the rat and Destined One fight side by side to bury Fuban beneath the sands once again and for all. The Destined One then left this time period and returned to the present, while the rat Guai was recognized by the King of Flowing Sands as a great hero, and at this point was officially given the rank of royal sage in the kingdom of Sahali, and would become the king's closest advisor and beloved hero of the people of Sahali, who would come to worship the sage directly instead of Buddhism. Shortly after this, the yellow sage advised the king to issue an edict known as the Rodent Reverence Edict, which essentially declared rats as celestial beings and made them protected by the law of the king. This resulted in many rodent guais from all over the place migrating into the kingdom and living among the humans as equals. However, not everyone was behind this edict. Several scholars of the Royal Academy, as well as the king's first son, the first Prince of the Flowing Sands, who we also fight in game and who also had shown great acts of heroism in the battle against Fuban and who was also given a new title of Brave General, did not appreciate all the rat guais running around and even began to become jealous of the Yellow Sage for stealing all his glory and snuggling up to his father the king, especially since the sage was a rat guai and not a human like the first prince. Oh, did I fail to mention that the king and his sons used to all be humans, not rat guais? Yeah, we'll get to that in a sec. Also, while I'm at it, the second Prince of Flowing Sands, who is also a boss in the game, is the king's second son, and there's not much else to say about him. He's the slow one, and his father's least favorite, but makes up for it with a really big hammer. Anyway, the first prince began to despise the sage so much that he rallied some other court officials to petition for the removal of the yellow sage from the kingdom entirely, which led to several upheavals breaking out, even resulting in bloodshed and the death of many of the prince's people. And all of this political savagery upset the youngest brother, the third and final prince of the Flowing Sands, so much that he straight up left the kingdom entirely, and we may or may not meet him later in the game. Anyway, this did nothing to change the king's mind about the sage, but things came to a head when, on the sage's birthday, the entire kingdom began to worship him at his statue. Even the king himself went to the sage's temple and offered incense and prayers directly to the rat. Keep in mind that this is the same king that isn't even a Buddhist. The first prince was so angered at this that he stormed into the temple and flipped over the incense table, which of course was seen as a sign of utmost disrespect towards a royal authority. This led to the very upset king king, imprisoning his son, the first prince, but despite all of this, the Yellow Sage actually spoke well of the prince, which the first prince took as an even greater sign that the sage is deeply conniving and deceptive, and began cursing the sage incessantly from within his cage, which the king heard and then declared that the prince be disciplined extremely strictly, with meal restrictions and absolutely no visitors ever. Without the prince's backing, those who opposed the rodents of the kingdom quieted down, and the people resumed their worship of the rat sage. After this point, mysteriously, the kingdom of Sahali began to undergo an irreversible change. Its people had all been turned into rats. The specific reasoning for this transformation is left up to interpretation, but the Yellow Sage appears to know the reason behind it, since he claims that the rat transformations were a calamity that he himself brought upon the people of Sahali. In my opinion, the rat transformations took place because of yet another punishment from the Buddha, or perhaps more specifically, the Bodhisattva, since the people of Sahali yet again turned away from their worship of Buddhism to worshipping the rat sage and his rodents instead. But like I said, even though I believe this to be the case, it isn't explicitly confirmed in-game. Now, in the novel, the Kingdom of Sahali and the Yellowwind Ridge are two separate locations that assumedly were decently distanced from one another. And this could still be the case, since the way we enter the Kingdom of Sahali in-game is through a magical portal to the past. But it could also be that the devs literally combined the two kingdoms into one game. Either way, eventually the Yellow Sage, his Tiger Vanguard, and the King of Flowing Sands along with his now Rat-Gwai people all came to live in the Yellowwind Ridge. However, when the sage arrived, not only were there already villages with villagers living there, but he also discovered an entire populace of Rock-Gwais living in the mountain, led by two powerful main Yao-Gwais known as the mountain deities. The first of these deities was called the Mother of Stones, a Yao-Gwai chief, who was made of a blue quartz with the unique ability to absorb the essence of the moon and, as such, became sentient sooner than any of the other Rock-Gwais. The other mountain deity was a Yao-Gwai king called the Father of Stones, also known as Shingandang. These mountain deities were leading the rest of the Rock-Gwais in combat against one powerful Rock-Gwai in particular that we do not see in-game that had become enormously powerful after absorbing strange, sentient Buddha heads made of flesh that popped up out of the ground and would scream at people who passed by and even eat them if they got too close. With every Buddha head the Rock-Gwai smashed, it would absorb it and sprout a Buddha rock head on its body, becoming stronger and stronger until no other Rock-Gwai could withstand a single punch from it. The battle was not going very well for the mountain deities though, and the Mother of Stones had sacrificed much of her precious blue quartz, which was ineffective against the mighty Buddha-headed Stone Gwai. But just as the Mother of Stones fell to the ground in despair, the Rat Sage appeared. Apparently moved by a sense of righteousness, the Yellow Wind Sage decided to assist the mountain deities in their fight against the evil Rock Gwai. He rallied the mountain deities together and asked for the help of the Keeper of the Mountain, who refused to do anything but sit safely on the sidelines. Not that this really mattered though, since the Yellow Sage and co. were quite successful in not only destroying the evil Gwai, but also eliminating all of the weird fleshy Buddha heads that sprouted up all over the place. The rat then extracted the essence from the evil Gwai and divided it between the two mountain deities, which gave them both great powers and transformed them into very humanoid-looking figures with human hearts, known as the Essences of Stone. Together, the Father and Mother of Stones used their new powers to create newer, better Stone Gwais, one of which in particular was larger and stronger than all the others, which they decided to call the Son of Stones, who would eventually become known as the Stone Vanguard, a Yao-Gwai king we can also encounter in the game. The Keeper of the Mountain, also known as the Man-in-Stone Yao-Gwai chief boss in the game, was not awarded any of the stone essence since he really didn't do anything in the fight. But after seeing how powerful it made the other mountain deities, it made him so jealous that he ended up trying several different attempts to steal the stone essence that was given to the Mother of Stones, including even going so far as to try to disguise himself as a Poise Stone, one of the Mother of Stones' daughters, and approach the Mother of Stones stealthily, attacking her and springing upon her, trying desperately to absorb her essence before her underlings could get him off of her. To his dismay, she screamed, alerting the other Stone Gwais who got to him before he could complete the absorption, halting him halfway. And to his dismay even more so, he had absorbed just enough of the stone essence to transform his body into a stone, sealing him within his half-rock disguise forever. Then the Stone Gwais, including the Stone Vanguard, pummeled him into the ground, where he stayed until meeting the Destined One, who then has the option of killing the Mother of Stones stones, absorbing her stone essence and giving it to the man in stone, who believes it to be able to transform him back into his human form. After which the Destined One just beats it back out of him, and he then turns into a vendor for the rest of the game. But anyway, after the mountain deity's victory over the Buddha Head event, the Yellow Wind Sage was once again heralded as a great hero by the mountain dwellers and settled down in a cave to live alongside his tiger vanguard, the tiger's 2 sons, the king of flowing sands, his 2 sons, and the rest of the Sahali rat people. Eventually, soon Wukong's trio passed by and came into contact with the old tiger vanguard, who had been tasked with scouting the mountainside in order to find some food for his master, the Yellow Wind Sage. The tiger vanguard was determined to kidnap the monk in order to cook and eat him, which is kind of a theme with a lot of the different Yao Guais in the novel, since a lot of them believed the monk's flesh to be able to grant powers or immortality, but found himself in combat against the incredibly powerful Monkey King and his pig friend Zhu Bajie, who readily told them exactly who they were and what their purpose was. As the fight intensified, the trio moved further away from the monk, who had stayed behind, but then the tiger pulled a fast one and, in a dust storm, ripped his own chest skin off and placed it on a nearby rock as a distraction, then hurried back to steal the monk away, which ultimately was successful. When the tiger returned to the Wind Sage and told him who he was, the sage refused to eat him immediately, knowing that the monk's infamous monkey might show up demanding a fight. This proved accurate, and soon Wukong did in fact appear soon after this at the mouth of the cave, demanding to fight to return his master. The tiger vanguard then came out to accept the monkey's challenge, which ended with him running away from Wukong only to be cut down and killed by Zhu Bajie's 9-toothed rake. Wukong then sent Bajie back to tend the horse and returned to the cave of the Yellow Wind King to retrieve his master. After a very intense clash between the Monkey King and the Yellow Rat, the latter blew his Samadhi Wind directly into Wukong's face, which didn't kill him since he's one tough son of a bitch, but instead blinded him and caused him to retreat. Long story short, soon Wukong was healed by one of the immortals tasked with assisting the journey to the west, after which he returned in mosquito form and spied on the Yellow Rat within his cave. Overhearing that nobody can beat his Samadhi Wind except for his old master, Bodhisattva Lingji, Wukong then traveled to Mount Sumeru and enlisted Lingji's help in defeating the Yellow Rat, who knew exactly what to do. Bringing with him the Wind Tamer and the Golden Long Staff, he returned on Wukong's cloud to the Yellow Wind Ridge and had Wukong lure the rat back out of the cave. After the rat emerged and engaged in combat once again with the Monkey King, the Bodhisattva took him by surprise and hurled his Golden Long Staff at him, which transformed into a golden dragon that snatched up the Yellow Rat and slammed him against the mountain rockside, doing so much damage to him that he de-transformed back into his original yellow mink form. After this, Lingji took the rat back with him to Mount Lingshan, and the Wukong trio reassembled and moved on past the Yellow Wind Ridge. In the Yellow Sage's absence, and with the old Tiger Vanguard dead, his 2 children were left to raise themselves alone. Since they were Tiger Guais, they were naturally more powerful than any of the other Guais in the area and became their leader, with the older brother leading the rock Guais of the mountain. The elder tiger abided strictly by a moral code, pledging to only devour evil and protect those who are good, which earned him the reputation of being a deity in the mountain. The villagers of Yellow Wind Ridge came to love these tiger brothers and even created the Crouching Tiger Temple in their honor, offering tributes to the tigers, which in turn made the tigers treat them even better. However, since the elder tiger, the vanguard, was the face of the tiger brothers and the leader, this made the younger brother begin to feel envious of his older brother's renown. Believing in his heart that his older brother was no more worthy than he was, he simply lucked out by being born earlier. At the same time, the Rockwise were experiencing a little drama themselves. The Father of Stones left the mountain unexpectedly, and the Son of Stones went out to try to get him to come back, leaving the Mother of Stones behind in the mountain, alone. Because of this, she began creating more Rockwise than ever before to protect herself and the mountain she loved. This part is left up to interpretation, but I believe the Father of Stones left the mountain and followed in the footsteps of the old evil stone Guai that had absorbed all the Buddha heads, somehow undergoing a similar transformation and becoming the multi-Buddha headed Shigandang that we see and fight in-game. It also appears that the Son of Stones fought his father and was able to bury him in the ground, keeping him sealed, then returned to guard the entrance of the mountain where his mother resided. A century passed, and the Yellow Wind Sage then returned to the Yellow Wind Ridge, back in his full rat Guai form, but this time with the head of Bodhisattva Lingji under his arm. This happened after the defeat of Sun Wukong, when the Yellow Rat was given the Fuming Ears relic. Just like the Black Wind Bear before him, the rat could also not figure out how to cultivate the relic's power from within his own body, so he tricked the Bodhisattva and successfully decapitated him, hoping to use his master's head as the vessel for channeling the relic's full power. His plan at this point was to cultivate strong Samadhi winds in the ridge, sealing himself off from any interference while he attempted to unlock the relic's full power. Once the sage returned to the ridge, several things happened. The king of Flowing Sands and all of his rat people once again rallied to the sage's side, along with his second son, since his first was not only still imprisoned but had also gone mad. The Tiger brothers, on the other hand, were not happy to see the sage return, especially the younger brother, who still blamed the rat for the death of their father at the hands of Zubagia over a century ago. The Mad Tiger then urged his older brother to join him in not only driving out all of the rats from their Yellowwind Ridge mountain, but also in straight up slaying the Yellowwind sage. But as I'm sure you could probably guess, they were absolutely no match for the sheer power of the sage, especially now that his power was being fortified by the Bodhisattva's severed head. The younger tiger was knocked out immediately, and just before the sage landed the killing blow, the elder brother cast down his weapons and knelt in surrender to save his little brother's life. The sage, who has always been weirdly very forgiving, immediately forgave both of them, understanding where their anger came from, especially once he heard that they blamed him for their father's death. He even granted the older brother the official title of being the new Tiger Vanguard, and even though the older tiger did truly hate the sage, he still accepted because he was no fool, and knew that the alternative would mean death for him and his brother. However, when the Mad Tiger woke up and learned that his older brother not only surrendered to the sage but also accepted his invitation to serve him, he couldn't believe it, and the two of them argued bitterly until the Mad Tiger finally stormed off, destroying the last ties of the Tiger family once and for all. The sage also tried to check on his old pal the Mother of Stones, but was stopped by the Son of Stones at the entrance to the mountain, which the sage initially took as a threat, ordering the Tiger Vanguard to eliminate the powerful Stone Gwai. However, since the tiger and the Son of Stones went way back and literally used to run the mountain together as mountain deities, the tiger instead made a deal with the Rock Gwai, convincing his old friend to just join the tiger and sage's forces instead of fighting against them and focus solely on guarding Shigandang. And he also advised the Son of Stones that the yellow sage could kill them both if he wanted to, so it was probably in their best interest to just comply. The Son of Stones agreed to this wisdom and no longer opposed the rat, and the next day the Yellow Wind Sage appointed the Rock Gwai his new Stone Vanguard. Also, as a fun fact, you can actually make the Stone Vanguard fight against Shigandang if you summon Shigandang while the fight with the Stone Vanguard is ongoing, after which of course you can kill them both. Anyway, the Tiger Vanguard then lived out his days in servitude to the Yellow Rat, even though he secretly hated him, venting his anger by devouring some of the sage's rat people every day at the Crouching Tiger Temple, breaking his old moral code of never devouring the innocent. Meanwhile, his younger brother had stormed off to the nearby village of Windrest and was living at the bottom of a well just outside the village, where he would practice his fighting techniques and roars. One day there came to the village a father and his sickly son. The father was a mighty swordsman who had forsaken his fighting days due to falling in love with a woman. He married her, and together they had a child and lived happily in a city nearby. However, terrible winds started stirring up one day, and they caused his wife to become very ill, and eventually to pass away. Their child also began to succumb to the same illness. However, the man had heard of a Bodhisattva Lingji who could cure this wind sickness, but upon reaching the Mount Sumeru, discovered that the Bodhisattva had left to the Yellow Wind Ridge but had not yet returned. Desperate to save his son's life, he and his son arrived at the village of Windrest, but to the father's dismay learned that it was also right beside the source of these terrible winds, making his son's condition even worse by the hour. One day, while the man was searching high and low for the Bodhisattva, he heard a tiger's roar coming from a well. Finding this strange, he climbed down this well and discovered the Mad Tiger, who was still nursing some of his wounds from his fight with the sage. While they talked, the swordsman explained his son's illness and their reasoning for coming to Windrest. The Mad Tiger then had the bright idea of pretending to be his brother, the mountain deity, Tiger Vanguard, and the one who the Crouching Tiger Temple was raised in honor of. And when the swordsman asked the other people of the village if this was true, they confirmed that it was, as they had no idea he was talking about the younger brother and not the actual Tiger Vanguard. However, the Mad Tiger decided to go all in with his impersonation of his elder brother, and once the swordsman was done telling him of his sickly child, claimed that he, as a deity, could heal the young boy. This caused the swordsman to lower his child down into the well, where the tiger verified that the sickness was indeed caused by the dangerous Samadhi wind. He had a magical gourd that his older brother had given him to treat his wounds, and on a whim suggested that the boy drink from this gourd, claiming that it would heal him. Upon drinking the water from the gourd, the boy actually did start to get better, speaking once again and praising the Mad Tiger, calling him the Tiger God. The so-called Tiger God was ecstatic and finally found respect and satisfaction from helping this father-son duo, so he instructed them to come back every day in order to have the boy sip from the gourd. However, the Mad Tiger also grew hungry and told the father that he too was affected by the Samadhi wind and the only cure for his ailment was the flesh of the living. Even though the swordsman was very reluctant to grant the tiger this wish, the image of his son being healthy and happy once again was all he really wanted. So he purposed in his heart to do whatever it took to achieve this goal, and began tricking some of the villagers to follow him down into the well, where he would feed them one by one to the mad tiger god. For a while, things continued on this way, making the boy much healthier and the mad tiger much less hungry. The tiger even straight up gave his magical gourd to the boy entirely to take with him, trusting them to return day by day and deliver villagers for the tiger to eat. But one day they stopped coming altogether, leaving the mad tiger confused for several days following until he decided to venture out of the well in order to figure out what was going on, where he discovered that the entire village had been slaughtered mercilessly by a vengeful blade. At the entrance of the village was a single coffin. Inside this coffin was the corpse of the young boy, still wearing the tiger's gourd around his neck, having been beaten to death by sticks. It turns out the villagers had figured out that the swordsman was leading them to their deaths at the bottom of the well, but instead of confronting the father about it, they decided to take their revenge by beating his child to death with sticks and rods as revenge for their murdered neighbors. This led the swordsman, now known as the tiger's acolyte, to once again draw the sword that he had sealed away due to falling in love with his wife. With everything taken from him, he cut down every man, woman, and child in the village, then set out alone to wander for the rest of his days, until encountering the Destined One on a bridge. His last words as he meets his end are, "This is my karma. I shouldn't have. With all my skills, I failed." And once he dies, he drops his son's old rattle-drum toy, which the Destined One can then use to communicate with the boy's spirit, leading him to the well, where we can encounter and put an end to the mad tiger god for good. Now back to wrapping up the story of the Yellow Sage and his remaining company. The Tiger Vanguard and King of the Flowing Sands were not getting along, but were still forced to work together at the command of the Yellow Wind Sage. And if it were not for the king's second son, the second prince of the Flowing Sands, and his mighty hammer, the tiger might have just as easily eaten the Rat King. But the king was wise to his eating his fellow rats and was planning on some sort of restoration, which likely meant he was planning on fighting back against the tiger in some way. But before any of his plan was able to come to fruition, the Destined One arrives and eliminates both the king and second prince of the Flowing Sands. After this, the Destined One encounters and eliminates the long since maddened first prince, and at the very same Crouching Tiger Temple ends the life of the final Tiger Vanguard, leaving only the story of the Yellow Sage himself to be wrapped up. You might be wondering, why is it that the rat decided to turn evil, even though he appears to possess good qualities? According to the journal entry of Bodhisattva Lingji, whose headless corpse, by the way, became none other than the mysterious headless musician who leads the Destined One along his journey, the Yellow Wind Sage appears to have blamed the siege of the beetle monster Fuban and the curse of the rat transformations on Lingji directly, claiming that those who bring disaster on others will have disasters brought upon themselves, insinuating that he opposes Lingji because of the way he disciplined the people of Sahali, believing it to be unfair, possibly seeing his own actions as vengeance. The Destined One finally encounters the Yellow Wind Sage in the middle of the valley as he's in the middle of attempting to harness the full power of Sun Wukong's relic within the Bodhisattva's head, but at long last falls victim to the might of the Destined One and his mighty rod, finally ending the story of the little yellow mink who sought justice for the villagers of Yellow Wind Ridge. Bodhisattva's head reattaches to his body and he removes Wukong's fuming ear's relic from his head, giving it to the Destined One instead. And with that, we have now officially wrapped up the explanation and backstory of every single boss in Chapter 2 of Black Myth Wukong. If there was any lore I missed or got wrong, please let me know all about it in the comments below. And if you're still listening to my voice right now, thank you so much. I apologize for the amount of time these videos take to create. There's just a lot of story I want to make sure I get right when I'm researching and scripting, but you guys make it all worth it. Please consider leaving a like if you enjoyed the video, or at least my efforts into making the video, and subscribe if you haven't already for much more gaming lore to come, including the other boss explanations for the rest of the game. Huge thanks as always to the supporters of my channel who helped tremendously with the video creation process. Follow me on my socials for updates and giveaways, and that's all I've got for this one. So as always, this is Bandit, looking forward to seeing you next time, and signing out. See you in Chapter 3. Peace!